At the end of a year where there seems to be so little to be optimistic about, with the continuation of existing wars to the overnight development of a new war in the Middle East, to desperation at our borders, crime in our streets, and still high prices for the most basic of needs, we wondered, is there any reason to have faith in anything these days?
Now, this is Talking Points on CBS News Minnesota.
Good evening and welcome to Talking Points. I'm Esme Murphy. From that very gloomy perspective, we visit tonight with four faith leaders in this show. After all, aren't they the people who are supposed to help us feel better, deal with crises, perhaps even a promise of eternal life? Well, tonight you will hear from prominent Jewish, Muslim, Lutheran, and Catholic leaders. We ask, why should any of us have faith? Do they ever lose faith? What do they tell broken people who come to them for help? We can only hope you find their answers as refreshing, insightful, and yes, even comforting as we did. Let's start with the perspective from Rabbi Marcia Zimmerman of Temple Israel in Minneapolis. Joining us right now is Rabbi Marcia Zimmerman of Temple Israel in Minneapolis. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Esme, for inviting me.
We're talking about faith, and one thing I want to ask you as a religious leader, do you ever find moments where you doubt your faith or have questions about your faith, and how do you deal with that?
Absolutely, I'm human. Not my identity is not rabbi. My identity is human, and a faith not tested isn't a faith that's real, and a faith that has questions. I mean, what I love about Judaism is that the questions are so much more important than the answers, actually, because the answers come from a point of view, but the questions open the door to curiosity. There's a concept in Musar, which is basically our meditative arm of Judaism. It's about character development, and it's hitlamdut, and it means curiosity. How do we come to our doubt with curiosity rather than fear? That, for me, is really the answer to, of course, we all have doubts, we all have questions, but how we approach those questions and doubts means all the difference in the world.
Fascinating, because you're saying doubt can be good, productive, lead to good things.
Oh, yes.
But what about that doubt that cripples, that's overwhelming when people wonder, where is God?
Yes.
Where did he go?
Right. So often it's about what our concept of God is, right? And our expectations of God and the divine presence in our lives. And so often we perhaps need to switch I like to look at life as a kaleidoscope, right? We have the same number of pieces of beautiful colors and rocks, but sometimes we get stuck on a picture and think that's the only picture. Sometimes you just need the slightest alteration to move the same things, the same rocks, the same beautiful realities. We need to change it just a bit to give us another perspective. So for me, doubt of God, doubt of a divine presence, when you're feeling so bereft, anxiety is consuming. It is something that is like a groove in a record where you get stuck over and over and over again. How do we get out of that being stuck is so important. And I think that sometimes we see God as an external force. And in those moments of doubt, want to connect into and draw from the internal divine. We're all created in the divine image, the internal divine message about what it means to change my perspective a bit, just a bit, to gain the resources necessary to find my footing and to allow myself that doubt and to lean into it, but also to not feel like it has to be one answer that we've been given, because there's such a palette of beautiful ways the divine presence is in our lives.
Some of that was so articulate and so well spoken. I somehow imagine that people have been coming to you with those questions because it certainly sounds like you have been talking about it.
They have. And Judaism has a wonderful solution to those doubts, and it's the doing in order to believe. Judaism is a deed that leads to creed. Knowing that our belief is going to be wavering, there are many opportunities for that. When we lose a loved one, we tear a ribbon because of the tear in our hearts at the loss, but also to remain our footing and to question God about this is okay in Judaism when we feel this time. And so Judaism says just keep doing the rituals because they're the way that we order chaos. Keep doing the rituals because they allow us to believe again.
Rabbi Marcia Zimmerman, thank you so much. I'm not Jewish, but I find myself comforted by your words, so thank you so much.
Thank you, Esme, very much.
Up next, Imam Asad Zaman of the Muslim American Society of Minnesota and Lutheran Bishop Patricia Lull of the Saint Paul Area Synod of the ELCA. Joining us right now is Imam Asad Zaman. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me today.
Wanted to ask you, there's a lot going on in this world that has people pretty upset, pretty down, and wondering why should we have faith in any God or anything at all?
So it's especially during difficult times that we need faith in God. For a people who are besieged or for a people who are suffering, having the faith in God and the promises of God can be especially comforting to people. I know they are to me and to many of the people in my masjid who are dealing with profound loss and grief. Having a faith and belief that God will ultimately provide justice and comfort provides a source of strength to people.
Where do you go, though, to those people who say, where is God? Look at what's happened here. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think we can see goodness even and especially in times of badness, especially when you see a whole series of wrong or injustice or evil or even natural disasters occurring. You naturally see the helpers, the people who rush forth to help and provide assistance to their fellow human being. And in them, you can see the light of divine goodness. I think the purpose of God is not to eliminate all evil on earth currently. The purpose of God is to give people a choice between good and evil. So especially when bad things are happening, it is an opportunity for us to look and find the good that is also happening.
You know, and this has been going on for centuries, if not millenniums. In the name of God, there's so much pain that's created. What
Yes,
do
and
you have to say about that?
I think all the people attempting to create that pain have to ask themselves that one day they will stand in front of that God and they will have to answer for what they did. I do not believe God intends for people to be allowed to be hurt in his name. And I do believe that people do misuse it. For me as a Muslim, I know that I will stand in front of God one day. And I know that everybody will stand in front of God one day. And that gives me a lot of comfort and hope, by the way. So if a person thinks they can escape by doing injustice and quote unquote get away with it, but that may be true in this world, but they will not get away with it in the sight of God.
And what do you say to people who come to you who are broken or who are in profound grief or are feeling profound loss? What do you say to them?
And I have unfortunately have had to do that a lot over the last 2 months. I say to them, God is watching, God is with you. This too shall pass. Have faith, have hope. And it is God's wisdom and God's desire that eventually justice shall prevail. So you will get your justice. It may be delayed a little bit.
All right. Well, Imam Asad Zaman, thank you so much. We certainly appreciate your insights.
Thank you so much.
Joining us right now is Bishop Patricia Lull. She is with the Saint Paul Area Synod, ELCA. Thank you so much for joining us.
Grateful to be here.
Let me ask you, first of all, there's a lot of people, I think, who are feeling right now that there's not a lot to be faithful about. A lot of people doubting their faith. What do you say to that?
Esme, I want to say when I encounter someone who in a very reflective way is actually wrestling with the question of what their deep faith commitments are, I have such high regard for such a person. I think culturally what happens more often is kind of a drift away from faith without much reflection on that, getting busy with other activities in one's life, finding other things to define their purpose, their identity. But when a person is really reflective, that's a great conversation partner. And I think most religious leaders would welcome thoughtful conversation, not argument, with a person who is really reflecting on where their faith has been challenged and changed.
Do you ever have doubts about your faith?
I have doubts often not about my faith, the core of my faith, but the work of religious institutions, and even more importantly, of individual, and because I speak as a Christian, the activities of some Christians absolutely gives me pause, how they can be my siblings in a faith tradition. But as for the core beliefs, maybe that's just a gift given to me by the Holy Spirit that I can go through life feeling deeply anchored.
What do you tell somebody who is really low and really struggling with all aspects of their lives, whether it's grief or something else that's happened? What do you tell them? Because many people in that situation look and say, well, if there is a God, he certainly has abandoned me, or she has abandoned me.
I want to speak to that a little bit from a personal lens. My own father died when I was 12, and I very clearly remember aspects of the Christmas before he died. He had cancer, so we knew he was not well. And then the Christmas after he died. So even as a teenager, knowing that grief was going to be woven together with holidays, and I think that continues on in life. Received a card yesterday from a lifelong friend whose brother just died. She's a woman in her late 70s, and how shook she has been by the death of a sibling. And so I try to begin with my own compassion, empathy for people about how very tough grief is, and always holiday seasons bring that to the fore. I have a couple more things I could say, but let me ask if you want me to detail that a bit more.
Well, just briefly, we've got a minute left. What are some of the things that you would say? Because I think a lot of people in grief are struggling with that, or in grief over the world situation or wars.
I say to people, go and be with others. I think within a religious context, a community of faith, that's your first right move. And I think there is a lot of receptivity, particularly at holidays, of people who come seeking. And if it can't be a community of faith, then go to a coffee shop, go talk at some neighborhood gathering so that you are with other people. And the second thing I say to people, do something to serve others. Reach out beyond yourself, even at those lowest points, because I think that's where our spirits are buoyed. And we find when we act with compassion, when we seek reconciliation with others, some kind of holiday goodness comes into our own being.
Well, Bishop Lull, thank you so much. That was a very lovely, lovely statement and really interesting to hear your perspective. Thank you.
Grateful for this opportunity. Thank you.
Up next, Archbishop Bernard Hebda of the Archdiocese of Saint Paul and Minneapolis. Well, joining us right now is Archbishop Bernard Hebda. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're most welcome, Esme. Good to be with you.
I want to ask you, a lot of people may look at what's going on in the world right now and say there's not much reason to have faith. How do you respond to that?
Well, that's been an age-old question for sure. And my own experience, it's really in those darkest moments that faith is most important. Coming from the Christian tradition, we're just going to be celebrating the birth of Jesus, and he's born at a really difficult time. So he's born in Bethlehem, a place that's overrun by the Romans. He's born into poverty. Boy, everything could seem so bleak, and yet that's precisely the moment that we believe God intervenes into our history. And so it's in those times that are so dark that I think our faith is most important, and we really have to rely on our own experiences of God's love in the midst of those difficulties to kind of get us through those difficult times, and to have that the hope that comes from our faith that we have a God who's with us even in these difficult times.
Are you speaking from a personal perspective too? I mean, do you have moments when you doubt your faith?
Oh, Esme, I think we all have times where we wish that if we were God, we would do things differently, right? And so when you look at the situation in the Middle East, or we hear the stories from Ukraine, boy, it's really bleak. Or just when I hear so many families talk about their own difficulties here, and that it prompts me to always raise those questions as well, as to where is God in the midst of that. And yet our own tradition always calls us back to God's closeness to those who are most in need, to the little ones. And really, when we think about Jesus and his life, it was always to be with those on the peripheries, those who were feeling threatened. And so I find great encouragement in that personally, as well as the leader of this local Catholic church.
What do you say when somebody comes to you and says, I am really low, I'm down and out, my life is, things are so bleak, there's no hope? What do you say to people when they say that?
I think, first of all, we always try to resonate that we appreciate and to respond that we appreciate those experiences, and that we're grateful for the person sharing. And often it's just in that process of telling another person about our difficulties that we have the first opportunities to kind of come out of that darkness. I always speak about the gift of life, of how important life is, try to get the person to reflect on those past experiences where they've felt a closeness to God, or where they've had hope in their hearts. I usually might ask them about their own experiences, those times where they really felt loved, not only by God, but by others. And often it's in remembering those experiences that we're then able to move forward. So that's a little bit the way that I would deal with that. And obviously, as a man of the cloth, I always try to bring God into those situations.
Do you think it's possible to go from not having faith to having faith?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we have so many beautiful stories of that throughout all of history. We have people where the light bulb goes on, and they finally have that experience of God's closeness to them, and it really then becomes the hermeneutic for understanding their past life as well. And so, you have a great figure like a Francis of Assisi or a Ignatius of Loyola, who really go from that point of having little faith to having great faith. And it's not just something from the Middle Ages, it's an experience that we have all the time. One of my favorite days of the year is something called the rite of election. And we invite people to the cathedral and to the basilica on the first Sunday of Lent who were entering the church, especially those who were preparing to be baptized. And often they would speak about those events in their lives that helped them to go from no faith to deep faith. And so I know that that's something that continues today. And I'm really grateful for it. And it does give us, I think, a perspective that helps us to navigate the rough waters. You know, there are those times where we feel like the Lord isn't so present. There's a beautiful gospel passage, and Pope Francis used it in the midst of the pandemic. I don't know if you remember, there was right at the very beginning, there was a beautiful evening prayer from St. Peter's Square. So that massive square designed by Bernini, and it's only the Pope. So there's no congregation.
I do
It's
remember
just the
that.
Pope. And he refers to this passage in Scripture about the disciples being in a boat with Jesus, and the storm comes up, and Jesus is asleep, and the disciples are so upset that Jesus is sleeping through this, right? But it's a paradigm, I think, and certainly the Pope used it for that as well, that in those moments of a pandemic, or in those moments of war, or in those moments of domestic strife, that even though it might seem like God is absent, Jesus is actually there asleep in the boat, and he's able to bring things under control. So that's certainly our hope and our perspective.
All right, well, Archbishop Hebda, thank you so much. We really appreciate your insights.
Well, thank you, Esme. I'm grateful for the opportunity.
And that does it for this edition of Talking Points. Thank you so much for watching. As always, email me at esme@wcco.com with comments and suggestions. The show airs every Wednesday and Thursday night at 6:30 and 9:30 p.m. On Friday evening, the show will be posted to our YouTube channel for on-demand watching. I'm Esme Murphy, WCCO News.